So I've been trying to learn Unreal Engine for a while, and the results have been, yeah, they're not great. In fact, I'd put them clearly in the category of bad. So I went through a lot of YouTube tutorials and even bought some courses in order to figure this out. They all seem pretty similar though. Once you get in, you start kit bashing your stuff together from some mega scans. You go ahead and take the third person character, replace it if you want. Hello there, handsome. And then you use a bunch of game mechanics to go around to make, I don't know, some type of Tomb Raider kind of game. After a few weeks of messing around with this, I kind of gave up and just took a break. That's when I came across this video by Zachary McFink about remaking Toy Story 2 in Unreal Engine. It was a really cool concept. You take an older game, make it look fresh and new. You have all the references you need right there. You have the scope of the game, you have mechanics. And being an older game, it's probably pretty small compared to today's games, so it's a pretty great place to start. At least that's what I thought. So I started out on my own journey to try and remake a PS1 game. So for this, I decided to remake one of my favorite PS1 games, Tiny Tank. He's a sassy talking tank with a whole lot of ammunition.
Here you go, cowboy.
And I just overall thought the game was pretty fun. Plus, it was small and gave me something to go for. In retrospect, it was probably too much. I went ahead and brought in some references, started modeling. I eventually rigged up some controls and did a little bit of animation. It wasn't looking half bad, it was actually looking pretty good. I even went so far as to figure out how to get my game on my PC so I could take some 3D screenshots and put the level back together just so I had a reference for making the level later on. But before I went too far off the beaten path, I figured it was probably a good idea to see if this would actually work in Unreal Engine. Now, getting assets from one program to another is a little bit trickier than you might think. There are no shortage of videos and techniques of how to get something from Blender into Unreal. Everybody's got their own opinion on this. It took me a couple weeks to figure out a workflow that worked for me before I could start making the controls. Once I got it figured out though, it went pretty smoothly. But because I was just testing things out, I ended up just making a low poly version of my tank and bringing that in to try things out. I started off with a third person character controller, which, while functional and had some of the things I needed, like a jump, it was a little bit awkward and just didn't feel very good for a tank. So I started looking up tutorials. But unfortunately for me, despite the fact there are tons of good tutorials out there, they all seem to be focused on third-person characters or highly complex vehicle simulations. If you're looking for something else, you're kinda on your own. I did come across this great series by Marco Ghislanzani, and the kart racing series by Ryan Laley really helped me out a lot. With those, I was able to build my own control and suspension system, and it was feeling a lot more like the way I wanted it to. It turned a lot more like a tank, you could drive around, you could go over bumps. I even started on controls for the turret. It was feeling pretty good, but that's when I hit my first rough patch. As good as the controls were feeling, I was going for something a little bit more like Crab Champions, but I couldn't figure out how to get a double jump or a thruster jump in there. I couldn't figure out how to do the little dash. And gravity was an issue. So once again, I got tired of banging my head against the impenetrable wall that is Unreal, and I decided to take another break. While I was taking a break from Unreal Engine, I decided to focus on learning a little bit more about Blender. One thing to know about me is I am a course klepto. Grant Abbott puts out a course, I get that one. CG Boost puts out a course, yeah, I grab that too. You're welcome. I have a myriad of courses on a bunch of different platforms, and I am notoriously bad at finishing any of them. Learning is a nice idea, I just don't set aside the time. So since I had some downtime during the summer, I decided that I was finally going to finish a course. Since I was teaching my son Blender at the time, I decided that learning the essentials was a good place to start. We started off in the Launchpad course going through all the basics, but once we got to the car, it hit me. I have a vehicle, I have scenery, I have obstacles. I think we have the making of a game. I immediately went to work making the car and all the other assets. Now, while I could have just downloaded everything and used that on Unreal, I really wanted this to be something that I made myself. So I painstakingly went through the process of making everything, even rewinding the videos because I wanted to get as close as possible to the original as I could. After the car was finished up, I of course moved on to the rocks, even created some larger rock formations that I could use as larger obstacles or walls later on. I made the grass, I made the trees, I even went so far as to make the entire environment, just so I had a good reference that I could use on Unreal to recreate everything. Once the assets were done, it was time to bring them into Unreal. I brought in a few rocks, I also used a post processor to remake the look that I had in Blender, and I brought in the car, and I just used the tank controls that I had created earlier. With a little bit of tweaking, it actually felt pretty good to drive around. I still didn't have a sense of what this game should be at the time, but I was pretty encouraged that I actually had something that I made working. I thought that maybe this could be a linear course that you drive around, and that maybe you dodge some enemies and obstacles along the way. And of course, it's Launchpad, so there's going to be a boost. I even made this little ring to be like a boost that you go through and shoot through. But after playing around with it for like an hour, it didn't feel very good. Felt like it needed to be more fast-paced, dodging left, right, jumping over obstacles. So I thought maybe an endless runner would be a better fit for the kind of game I wanted. So I went to YouTube to watch tutorials on how to make an endless runner in Unreal. The ones by Unreal themselves I actually found the most helpful. I was able to come up with a spawning system for the tiles. Once you reach one, another one would spawn in, and that way I could have an endless course. Because I have changed the type of game that I wanted, I wasn't going to be able to use my tank control from earlier. I decided to use the built-in third-person character controller that's already Unreal because it already had things like jump on it that I wanted to use, and then I just modified that slightly. Then I updated my tiles using rocks and textures that I had already created. I put in some spawn locations for rocks along the walls for the environment, but then kept the player in with some invisible walls. I created 3 different spawn locations for the obstacles, but then added in some randomness into the code so that they wouldn't be exactly in the same spot every single time. Besides the rocks, I made a lower rock wall that you had to jump over. I made some ramps that you can go over and jump off of. I even added in the trees, and because I didn't just want to make a game, but wanted to learn as much as Unreal as I could, I decided to make these ones destructible. To add a little bit more animation to the car, I decided to go back into Blender and actually animate a few things. I went with the basic animations from the course, but also added in some jumping animations as well as moving left to right. I was able to keyframe those, convert them into NLA tracks, and then they just imported right into Unreal as animations. Once I had animation working correctly, it was back to Blender to create the funnest part of the game, destruction. Turns out you can just use the shape keys that you create in Blender and they'll come into Unreal as morph keys. That plus adding in some hitboxes equals a whole lot of fun. I also rigged the wheels to fall off for a little extra bonus. But as fun as smashing your vehicle into rocks really is, a game it does not make. I thought about a few ways I could make it a little more interesting. First of all, we need a point system. It gives it replayability, and it gives a goal to shoot for. But what about the boost? I knew I wanted to incorporate a boost somewhere in this. After all, it is a course by CG Boost, a course called Launchpad. I had to incorporate that in there somehow. So I went ahead and grabbed a screenshot of their logo, brought that into Inkscape, converted it to an SVG, and created a boost gauge out of it. It took me a while to figure out how gauges work in Unreal, but before too long I had it filling up and decreasing. And because I wanted to make things obvious, I created a pickup off of the logo as well, just so the player knew there was a connection between picking up the item and filling the boost gauge. Now, quick disclaimer. Since this is someone else's branding, I did email CG Boost and post in their forum asking if it was okay to post this game publicly. They gave me a thumbs up, which I hope they're still okay with, but I did remove the logos and other things from the trailer, just so I eliminated any kind of spoilers and Easter eggs in it. My ultimate goal with this project, beyond just learning Unreal Engine, was to provide kind of a thank you to the CG Boost team and to Zach for creating this awesome course. I knew his birthday was coming up in October, so I was in a rush to try and get this done before then. So now that I had the boost gauge in the game, I had to decide, what does this thing actually do? Does it make you go faster? I thought maybe if once it's filled up, you can activate Mario Star effect, where you can just freely go through all the obstacles. It didn't really feel right. Then I remembered from the trailer the car flying off into the sky and thought, that's it. So instead of this being an endless runner, there is actually a way to complete the game. I really wanted to lean into this idea that you have to fill up this gauge in order to take off. But to make it a little more interesting and a little more fun, I decided to add in a few more mechanics. Like if you jump, you lose a bit of your boost gauge. So you really have to decide whether it's worth it or not. And once you do finally fill up your gauge, you have a choice to make. You can either keep gaining points to higher your score, or you can lock in your score. But you have to survive a pre-launch sequence in order to get your score to actually count. And since most of your energy is going into this pre-launch sequence, you have limited movement and you no longer have a jump. I felt like this mechanic made getting a high score feel really rewarding. Also, the game goes faster the longer you play it. I made tweaks here and there. I added more obstacles, optimized what I could, and made some bug fixes. So many bug fixes. Whether it was bugs in Blender, like the fact that it updated to 4.2 and it destroyed my scene with the lighting and the fog for some reason not working, or the camera that didn't exist but was somehow attached to a wheel, to the weird bugs in Unreal like just making cables that suddenly don't work as soon as you put motion to them. I probably spent 2/3 of my time making this game just fixing bugs and things that got broken every time I added something. And I also have to give credit to my beta testers here, my children, who found every single bug you could possibly think of. Hold the jump button while also pushing the pause button. That'll put your car in an endless jumping loop. Have some misplaced hitboxes where you do damage to your car but not actually crash. Yeah, we'll find those. How about jumping out of the level? Or how about the fact that if you move back and forth quickly enough, you can bring your car to a dead stop? Yeah, that last one really bugged me, and for the longest time, I just had a mechanic where if you went too slow, your car just exploded. That was my fix for like 2 months. Eventually sat down and did a ton of testing and found a solution that kept the car moving correctly. So take that, cheaters. Besides getting the game to function the way I wanted it to, there are also two other things that I really wanted to get right: the start menu intro and the end credits. Even before I knew the mechanics of the game, I knew that I wanted to have like this menu screen that went seamlessly into a video and then just right into the game. I also wanted the start menu to be 3D because I want to add in some Easter eggs, and I just thought it was a really cool idea. This was way easier said than done. In fact, I probably spent about a month of the 3.5 months making this game just on the menu and intro. But I was going to have my start menu and intro, and it turned out beautifully. There's actually a lot going on here. It transitions from the menu to an in-game cutscene, or sequence as it's called in Unreal, and then out into the player camera. There are a lot of problems with this. Like, I didn't know that when you create a sequence in Unreal, nothing you move in the sequence actually happens in-game. So every time the sequence would end, it would just snap back to its original start position. So to counteract this, while this cutscene is playing, I actually have to move the different locations of the character and camera into their ending positions in the cutscene. As you might imagine, this creates problems. Whenever I made a change to one, it would affect the other. So it took quite a long time to actually get this working smoothly. I also had trouble with the menu itself. I got the 3D part to work, but I really wanted to have a controller to be able to navigate it. And while I could do this on the main screen because it was just a widget overlaying on the screen, I couldn't do it with the actual 3D widgets in the game. I looked all over YouTube, I even looked up forum posts, I even joined a Discord to try and find an answer. And although I know it can be done, I could not find an answer. So sadly, the controller does not work to navigate these other menus, but I'm hoping it's something that I can figure out in the future. Now that I have the start menu and intro sequence done, I moved on to the end credits. I didn't really know what I wanted to do here, other than have the car flying through the clouds, and then I thought, wouldn't it be a neat idea if this whole desert was really just one of those floating islands like you see at the beginning of the course? And the whole purpose of getting the boost to take off is to go to a different island. So I made this ice island at first, and then I thought there are other parts of the course that would be really cool if they are floating islands too. So I took some of the earlier stuff and modified it so it would go in this end sequence. I tried to get as much as I could because I really wanted the whole course represented here. I did the whole sequence in Blender because I wanted to have a pre-rendered cutscene as opposed to an in-game cutscene like I did earlier. Again, I just wanted to explore everything that you could do in Unreal and how you would do it. I dotted around some clouds, I made a little fog. My goal here was to have a little bit of a hint that there were actually floating islands in here, but you didn't really know until you got to the end and you zoomed out and you saw everything. My scene was pretty hacky with things like fading on and off, but I think the final scene actually came together pretty well. I also went through the trailer to find anything else that I could put into this. I found a font to match what was in the trailer, and I found some music that was pretty similar to the trailer as well that I'd use as the main music in the game. So now that I have the game put together, there's one last thing to do. Ship the game and hope it all worked. Yeah, that didn't happen. Turns out, trying to make a game that fits all different monitor sizes and aspect ratios and resolutions is really hard. In fact, I have a little bit of scaling on my monitors, so when I went to try and go full screen, there was a big offset where the mouse didn't match up to where it was actually in the game, and there were some resolutions that just made the game completely impossible to play. Eventually, I decided just to disable the options altogether and just go full screen 1920 by 1080 on everything. This is one of those things that'll have to work out in the future, but for now, I thought it was best if people could actually play the game and you wouldn't have to use Task Manager to close it. I did, however, keep the difficulty modes in there. There is an easy mode, though in my opinion, you should definitely play it on the normal mode. The other big issue I discovered while I was trying to ship the game was I had been testing this thing in the editor the entire time. Turns out, you can change the screen around and the widgets will adjust to it. I did not know this. It wasn't until I actually exported the game and played it that I realized a lot of things were not in the right place. So I went back and made multiple revisions. I'm trying to export this game. Should have been using the standalone option the entire time for testing, but you live and you learn. The final thing, of course, was to make a trailer for this. I didn't have a lot of good options. Basically what I did is I went through and I turned off all the widgets. I then would start my game kind of in autopilot, hit F8 to go into a free cam, and then just screen record everything I could. I got some pretty good shots, but as you can tell, the camera work is kind of shaky. I started in June and it was about mid-September at this time, so I was really under the gun to try and finish by October. I put together the clips that I thought were best, found some music, made a little edit, and sent it out into the world. Well, at least the CG Boost forum. There's a link to the game below, and I'd love it if you tried it out. If you do end up playing the game, I'd love to hear feedback in the comments below, in case I ever accidentally do this again. Though, I don't know if any of the other courses are really game material.